Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the Survive podcast, and today I'm joined by Peter DiGangi, and we'll be continuing from where we left off last time. And again, this discussion is based on his book titled "Dying for the Faith." I'll have a link to purchase the book in the description below and a pinned comment. That being said, Peter, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you again so much for having me.
Yep. All right. So, what did you want to start off? Because I remember you were telling me about your angle from looking at it from a fictional point of view, but while at the same time you do have some real thoughts. You do have some thoughts about it as well, kind of outside of that fictional milieu that you also want to kind of blend together today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the few things that I wanted to sort of set some context so people will understand where I'm coming from and where the book's coming from, but then also context for this discussion we're going to have. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes or so, hopefully. And then hopefully we'll have some questions. I did want to ask, there were a couple of people, maybe more than a few, who said after the first or during the first meeting that they were going to buy the book. And I was going to say if they wanted to, give me any feedback on what they thought of the book via a super chat, I would match any, donation they make to you. I would match it. And if they have a positive review, I'll double it. So I just sort of throw that out there for, when we get to the questions. Second thing, I do have to wish my wife it's her birthday today. So she's letting me do this, spend an hour with you and your folks. But I want to wish her happy birthday. She may be watching. I'm not sure if they could link in. I said happy birthday. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So I guess the first thing I wanted to sort of kick around was the idea of the difference between entertainment and education, and kind of the way I sort of came to appreciate the difference between those two things. One of the things that I thought was applicable was your interview with James Tabor, Dr. Tabor. You and I spoke about this a few weeks ago, and then I watched the interview you did with him. This is probably 2 or 3 years ago on the anniversary of the Waco tragedy.
Yeah.
Do you remember when he asked you, or he suggested that people watch the drama series called Waco?
Yes, I remember that a little bit.
And he talked about the importance of being able to see these people, like David Koresh, like live and in person, and get an understanding for what really motivated his behavior, and all of the people that were part of the cult. And he mentioned that one of the guys who was a survivor from the tragedy, when he saw that documentary, I'm sorry, it's not a documentary, the drama series, like, it gave him chills because the actor who played the character of David Koresh was so convincing. And certainly that's what I hope to achieve with my descriptions of, some of these historical characters like Paul and Peter and James. And I use a historical character, Eusebius, where I try to get into his head near the end of the story. So I kind of felt like that was an endorsement for fiction, not necessarily from my book, because obviously Tabor doesn't know my book, but I just thought that was interesting, and certainly that's how I approached it. But now I'm going to read you a quote that was very powerful for me when I read it. This was long into the process. I should tell you that in your audience, I worked with first Dr. Richard Carrier was a consultant on my book. And then I reached out and worked for some months, several hours over several months in Zoom meetings with Dr. Robin Walsh. But then I reached out to a legitimate literary agent / editor named Amaria Orenstein. And this is all in the acknowledgments of my book. And she kind of helped me piece the story together. And I remember one critical sort of conversation we had where we were talking about the movie My Cousin Vinny. Do you know that movie?
I don't think I do.
No, Joe Pesci and what's her name? The actress won the best supporting actress, but it's a courtroom drama, and she delivers this, testimony that solves the case. And I was asking Amaria, like, how is that not expository or didactic or an info dump? Because I had also read James's discourse in the Acts of the Apostles when he's on trial in front of the Sanhedrin, and I was kind of using that as a model. But Amaria's comment, not specifically to that, but in general, whenever I would get too didactic, she would say, the minute your character starts sounding like a professor at the front of the room lecturing out of a textbook, that's boring as shit. No one wants to read that. So she was that brutally honest with me. And so I tried to avoid doing that in my novel. So I'm having conversations between characters rather than lectures, obviously, right? But I know that your audience appreciates the knowledge that they gain from the scholars you have on your podcast. So it's a balancing act for a fiction writer to try to educate the reader and let the reader know that as the author, I'm educated on this subject, but also entertain and get people compelled enough to keep turning the pages. Okay. So well into the process, I stumbled across this. This is a director talking about one of the producers he was having an argument with. And he said, Mr. Aubrey had explained his objection to my version in previous meetings several times. In his opinion, my concept of the show would need an enormous amount of explanation each week, expository scenes to explain why this group of people was marooned on the island. Exposition is the most deadly obstacle to entertainment, whether it's a comedy show or a dramatic show. So the person saying that was Sherwood Schwartz. Any idea who Sherwood Schwartz is?
I don't recall the name right now. I don't recall.
Yeah, he did Gilligan's Island.
Oh, okay. Well, I know what Gilligan's Island is. I couldn't remember
so
the name.
He's the reason. I think he did the Brady Bunch. He did a bunch of crazy shows back in the 60s and 70s. But what he's saying is, the producer, he originally had the idea that these guys were going to go to a different island every week, and the guy's like, you're going to have to spend so much time bringing people up to speed. No one's going to stay with it. And then he came up with the Ballad of Gilligan's Island. And in that little theme song, he tells the whole story. So now when you get to the show, you know what's going on. I felt like I had to do a lot of that setting the stage before I have the climactic conversations between Paul and Peter and James at the Apostolic Council, or between Luke and the character I created named Lucia, who is, the mythicist versus the historicist debate as they're basically writing the Gospel of Luke. So they already have Mark and Matthew's Gospels. They have Paul's letters. They have the Septuagint. They have Homer and Virgil's literature with them, and they're crafting this story. But I had to have a couple of chapters of setup so that people understand who these characters are and why their conversations are important. So that's, again, that balancing act between the exposition or education and, the entertainment or the drama. So that was one thing I wanted to run by you. The second thing is this, how I view all these conversations that you have with the scholars and with biblical studies in general, I definitely come at it from the mythicist view, and my book definitely takes that. You remember from my first show with you, I had the picture of the blue dress and the gold dress. Yes. And how people kind of come to it with certain assumptions, and you see everything through that lens. From a bigger picture, I kind of look at everything, life in general, through the evolutionary lens. So I kind of look at people's behavior and I try to figure out why they are motivated by the environment they're in and the incentives they're perceiving to take the actions they take. And I'm wondering, was it you that had on your show a woman that was hypothesizing that human sacrifice, like the precursor for that behavior, is evident in like prey animals that watched the pride of lions eating the wildebeest that didn't get away? Did you have somebody on your show talking about that?
I don't currently recall. You don't. I'm guessing you don't remember the name of this person.
I looked it up beforehand, and there are different scientists, evolutionary biologists that have sort of tackled this, but it was definitely a woman's name that I saw that this person was referencing to. And it might not have been a biblical studies thing. It was just connecting the dots that, those animals that are under such stress to get away from the predator and they escape, but they stand in the distance watching the predators eat their former, herd mate. And they sort of postulate that this is a precursor to like, hey, maybe if we offer one up, then they'll leave us alone, whether it's the predators or then the gods, right? Now, this isn't even a theory because I don't know how you test that hypothesis, but that's kind of an interesting, sort of perspective to look at this sort of thing, because pretty much every culture had engaged in human sacrifice at some point back in the past, right? But then the other thing that I thought was a good example of this, I went to see Dr. Paula Fredrickson at the Harvard bookstore. I live in Boston area, and she spoke at Cambridge, at Harvard. And her book is called, at least the book she was releasing at that time was called Ancient Christianities. Did you have her on your show to talk about that?
I did. We interviewed him. We recorded in person at the last SBL meeting.
Gotcha. Right. And so I read that, but before I bought it that night, but I asked her, hey, do you, cover in your book how adaptive Christianity must have been to weather those 300 or 400 years before it became, Constantine's pet project, right? And she said it's infinitely adaptive. And yes, I do cover it in the book. So I was reading the book, and I guess I kind of disagree with her. Tell me if you think I'm onto something here. I don't see Christianity as being particularly adaptive to meet all the different challenges it faced. It's just that there were so many different sects of Christianity that one of them was able to get the ear of Constantine. So have you ever seen these nature shows with the sea turtles that lay like 10,000 eggs and 300 make it to the ocean?
Yeah, I've seen stuff like that. I've seen stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's not that they're really adaptive, it's that they produce so many offspring that a small percentage is going to survive. And so I kind of look at, again, through that lens, that's how I look at Christianity. It's not that the final product was so amazing. It's just that the other 29 versions didn't make it. I don't know how many there were, right? But there's got to be dozens of sects that were preaching different versions of the story. And that's kind of what the Nicene Conference was set up to, rectify all that. Is that a fair statement?
Well, what they wanted to do is they wanted to get rid of the Arian sect and promote the Catholic viewpoint instead. They wanted to push the Nicene Creed and declare that Jesus and the Son of God. Okay, Jesus is the Son of God, but what I mean is God the Father and Jesus were co-eternal and are both the same and different at the same time. And they wanted to make that clear, because Arius's problem is whom the Arians are named after. He's like, no, that doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction. If Jesus is the Son of God, then there was a time Jesus wasn't, and that those people at the bishops that came together at the council had a problem with that point of view.
So my understanding was that. Yeah, but then weren't there like 300 different bishops that had sort of slight variations?
Well, the way I look at it is, I mean, you kind of see this. There's an attempt. This is why I see Paula Frederickson's point, because as early as Galatians, which, and this is the thing, like, I get criticized by some people saying, oh, I'm not an expert. Well, I never claimed to be one. And then they'll get into an equivocation fallacy by saying an amateur doing research in the New Testament is like somebody trying to do, that doesn't really understand it, but someone that's trying to do medical surgeries or physics without understanding. I'm like, those are way more complicated fields to even try to compare them. Like, anyone saying that to me is like an idiot, and I think they're projecting. They're the ones that don't really know what they're talking about, because those are massive equivocation fallacies on a massive scale. And like, first of all, look at how many I've interviewed. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at these different scholars, they disagree with each other a lot. My show is proof of this.
Right.
You'll have one scholar that will say Paul's letters are 2nd century, and they're credentialed, they know what they're talking about. And you have another one that knows what they're talking about, saying, no, that's nonsense. It's 1st century. So they will oppose each other. So can you blame me for having certain radical views when I have scholars on my channel with certain radical views? What do you want from me? And this is the issue, that the way that history is done is not equivalent to the way physics are handled. Mm-hmm. That's when people make that comparison, because they're trying to say it somehow is. They're just not getting it. It's just not even remotely the same thing. And there are scholars. It's not like I'm the only person that was thinking like this. There were scholars way before my time that were already saying there's a problem with the dating of Paul's letters. And so anyway, but to finish my point on Galatians, regardless of when Galatians was written in the 1st century, I happen to think it was written in the 90s, not the 50s, but whatever. Regardless of when it was written in the 1st century, when you read Galatians and you read Paul's other alleged letters, you'll see that they're trying to harmonize different groups by saying it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Greek, free or slave, we're all in Christ together. In a way that is like a proto-Catholicism, if you want to call it that. They're trying to universalize the different sects of Christianity together by saying it doesn't matter our differences, we're all in it together. So there's already kind of an attempt to bring together as early as the letters of Paul. That's my point.
Yeah, and I talked to Dr. Carrier about this, and his comment was that, again, we don't see the letters that were written to Paul by the Corinthians or by whomever. We just see his response, and it sounds like a big part of the time he's spending is trying to get those factions to get along, because, hey, how come they don't have to, observe the Torah rules, and they can eat bacon and I can't, and they don't have to get, circumcised, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty evident, I think, in his letters, that he's trying to quell that conflict, right?
I think to a degree that's the case, but the other thing, and this is the issue that I'll be raising in my upcoming article for Bob's Journal, is we have to account for the co-authors, because we have to remember that 8 out of the 13 Pauline epistles in the New Testament are actually multi-authored. They admit this. Sophones, Tertius, Timothy, Silas, they're not just merely scribes. Especially when you see that, like the beginning of First Thessalonians, Paul, Silas, Timothy are together writing to the Thessalonians. So they're all contributing, and it's not hard to see that there are different points of view that'll be going into there as well. And it kind of proves the point of the Dutch radical scholars that, okay, there are different styles of writing in Paul's letters, and the consensus recognizes that too. And there's contradictions in Paul's letters, even the so-called genuine ones. It's like, okay, what if a lot of that can be explained away by saying we take those 8 letters and just take them as they are, that they're claiming to be multi-authored, so you have different points of view. And that would kind of explain the rhetoric of we're all in it together regardless of your views. Now, they don't always think like that. There is vitriol in the letters. There are times when they slip, and there's anger, especially in Galatians, and so that can happen. But it's a co-authored anthology. And when you look at Clement, that's the other point I'm going to mention, that Clement never mentions Timothy. He never mentions Silas. He never mentions Tertius. He never mentions Sophones. That's because they weren't part of the original Paul story. They hadn't contributed to the letters yet. That's why I don't think Clement mentions them, because they're not part of the original story. Those people got involved in a later time.
So I kind of look at those guys as people that were going to deliver the letter from Paul to whoever his target audience is, and then read it to them. Because most of the congregation would not have been literate, correct?
Well, I would say.
So I look at. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure, because Paul will tell us when someone's a deliverer and when someone isn't, and you see this with the person claiming to be Paul, like Onesimus was delivering a letter, versus someone that's co-authoring. There is a distinction that's made. And so I think that they really are co-authors. And the only letters that are attributed to Paul that are not co-authored is Galatians, Ephesians, 1 through Timothy, and Titus. The majority of the letters I just mentioned are not by all, but rejected by many scholars as pseudo-Pauline, except for Galatians. That's generally held to be genuine. And what I mean by genuine is like, okay, well, it's pre-war, but it's by the pre-war Paul. Yeah, so I think that the epistles are trying to kind of remake the original Paul in light of a more developed church. And
well, I kind of wonder if.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I kind of wonder if they're sort of making it up as they go along. You know what I mean? So, like, I imagine that he's traveling to these communities saying the end is coming, the end is coming. And then 15 years later, the end still hasn't come. And they're like, hey, my mother died and she was like living the Christian life. She was emulating Christ the way you want us to. What happens to her because she didn't make it till when Jesus comes? And then he has that whole thing about your bodies are going, the trumpets are going to blow. And right, he explains that for those people who have already died, they're still going to be saved, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm saying I suspect that we don't know the questions they were asking, but it would make sense that they're like, just like we are 2,000 years later, when is the end, right? We've been hearing about the end. And now, like David Koresh and those guys, right? They thought it was 1959. Now it's whatever. Actually, I should tell you when I was at that book, right, when Dr. Fredrickson spoke at the Harvard bookstore, she said the latest, doomsday is sometime in 2050. So they keep recalculating,
right.
It's still coming. It's just not, So I just find that hilarious. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine. I think the Gospel of Thomas, I'm convinced by the radical view that Thomas is early, very early, that I think the Thomas tradition is giving us a pretty good idea that in the original Jesus movement, they didn't really expect the second coming at all. They believed that the resurrection, well, the Gospel of Thomas doesn't mention the resurrection, but what I'm saying is the Gospel of Thomas is like, okay, the kingdom is already here. Jesus saying it's already happened. It's all around you, but you just don't understand it. But then, because I believe Jesus existed, so I think after he died, it's like, no, his original teachings aren't good enough. It gets rationalized. They eventually start teaching atonement theology. Now, that's not explicitly in the Gospel of the Hebrews, which I think is a later text that didn't come out. Let me rephrase. I think it's an early text, but I think it came out shortly after the original Thomas. And the atonement theology starts becoming a major thing, and especially in canonical Paul. And when you look at 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about, okay, Jesus' crucifixion, his death is what's going to atone your sins. Because originally, as it's taught in the Hebrew gospel, it was baptism that washed away your sins, not believing and accepting the death of Jesus and his resurrection. But it is baptism that would atone for your sins. And when you get to Luke, it's interesting because I was talking to Bart Ehrman earlier today. We recorded and haven't released it yet. I'm going to release it tomorrow. And that we were talking about Luke's gospel as being the only gospel that has no atonement theology in it. Luke Acts has no atonement. And the Paul in Acts has no atonement either. So it's interesting because the way I look at it is that the Paul character got remade, and it's attempting to harmonize the older tradition that there was no atonement and trying to make Paul fit in that situation. And so that's the way I look at it, that this is an attempt to kind of harmonize Paul with the non-atonement theology. But you can't really harmonize it because you got to do away with atonement entirely, which Luke Acts does. It just does away with the whole thing.
So let me ask you about this passage, because this one has confounded my imagination. But once I started looking at it through the mythicist lens, it makes more sense, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with this, Mark 4:11. And he told them the mystery of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those on the outside, everything is expressed in parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. So you're familiar with that passage, right?
Yeah, I think that's connected to an extent with the messianic secret that Mark's gospel teaches. You see this in the Gospel of Thomas, where Thomas begins by saying, these are the secret teachings of Jesus, and now I'm going to make sure you get the message. There's people out there not going to get it, but people that are know do get it. So you kind of get that heavily implied there. And Mark is lifting from that language, from my point of view. And this is also discussed in the kind of developed in what Clement of Alexandria talks about, the secret gospel of Mark. Now, I've had scholars on my channel that say one thing or another about if secret Mark or modern fake, or if it's older. My latest thoughts on it, I think I'm going back to thinking, I think it's a 2nd century forgery that was elaborating off of canonical Mark. I don't think it's a genuine, I think it's a forgery regardless of when it was created. And what Clement does, assuming Clement wrote the Clement of Alexandria wrote the Marsaba letter in the 3rd century, but it's basically saying, okay, so Mark is going to teach the mystery in one text, but in another text it's going to be more clear. And so that's kind of what I think's going on is that the Gospel of Mark is kind of, I'm talking about canonical Mark now, is lifting from Thomas and is trying to say, okay, here I'm going to say, you, the followers of Jesus, know the truth, but the others will be taught parables and they'll be confused and not truly understand Jesus's teachings. But only the true
But why would
followers
you
of
want to
Jesus.
confuse them? Hold on. Why would you want to confuse them? Why wouldn't you want them to turn and be forgiven? Like, it's almost like he's saying, we don't want them in our cult because they might turn and be forgiven. We got to confuse them. And that's where I think, so you're familiar with Clement of Alexandria, talks about the 4 levels: faith, gnosis, knowledge,
Yes.
Love, and then inheritance. I feel like this is an indication that the story is like, for the illiterate people who wouldn't understand the cosmic truth, that it all happened up in the 3rd realm, they need to believe he was a real historical person. And then if they're intelligent enough, then we tell them a little bit more, a couple of more mysteries, and, they elevate it to another level. And then beyond that, they might be, pastors or bishops, and then beyond that. And so in my story, Luke and Lucia are figuring this out. They're crafting the Gospel of Luke, and they're talking about, like, this doesn't make sense. Why would he say this if this is right? And then when he delivers the gospel to the presbyter and the bishop, they imagine he must be inside already. He already knows the mysteries. And so then they invite him to write the Acts of the Apostles, right? So again, if you look at it from the mythicist standpoint, that's one of those things that it makes no sense at all until you look at it from the mythicist. Like, why would they not want people to turn and be forgiven?
I would.
And then the same is true of Paul's letters, where he talks about, you're not mature, I had to feed you milk because you were babies, right? As you grow in the faith, then we tell you more and more, but you can't handle the truth yet, right? So Clement of Alexandria obviously knew about this. It's kind of like, where in the space of the Gospels did those 4 levels get lost? That's a question I'd like to hear your experts talk about, because it seems to me that at least certain people thought that that's what was going on, and then it changed over time.
My take is, I mean, this isn't the only, like, cult where this happens in. It's like,
right. Oh, 100%.
What I'm trying to say is, they can teach one thing outside the cult without giving the full details of their teachings until you get inside the cult. That's the way I look at it. I don't think,
No,
I think it still works of a historical Jesus. I don't personally see the issue. And that's really what
it would either way. Yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. And I don't think Matthew and Luke liked that. They do away with Mark's messianic secret.
Right.
And again, that's a plus for Mark in priority, because I think Mark in priority definitely makes more sense. Mark at least being the first of the 4 biblical gospels, not like it's the first text about Jesus that was ever written. That's a different issue. But
right.
I think it was responding to, and in some ways working with the kind of the messianic secrets that are the messianic secret that's in Thomas. But Mark is working from that, whereas Matthew and Luke, they don't really want to work with that. They want to do away with it. And I think Thomas is a source for these texts. In some ways that Q is thought to be. I don't believe Q existed. But I think Thomas, in a way, is that text, as it has congratulations to the poor there. It doesn't say in spirit. So it has the Lucan formulation, which is often thought by scholars that believe Q existed to be more primitive. Well, if Luke was lifting it from Thomas as opposed to lifting it from Matthew, then that can explain it without the need of a hypothetical document that we do not know exists.
Right. And we do know Thomas existed. So,
yeah,
right?
that's at least we know that. I mean, this is not a position that many hold to. There was Matthew Clark. He holds that position. I've done recordings with him. They're not out yet, but I plan on getting them out this month, or at least some of them out this month. But Matthew Clark believes in Thomasine priority.
Mm-hmm.
And Thomas is earlier than the Gospels and Paul's letters. I think I agree with that point of view, but I think the Gospel Thomas was heavily modified in the 3rd century because we're kind of told this by a church father, Cyril or Cyril, as I always pronounce him, of Cyril of Jerusalem or Cyril of Jerusalem, who was living in the 4th century, I believe. And he said a Manichaean wrote Thomas, who called himself Thomas in the 3rd century. Well, since Papias seems to attest to the Gospel of Thomas to me, and Hippolytus does, I believe, Origen of Alexandria does, and the Clementine recognitions does too. So I think that
has to be earlier than that.
Yeah, so if it was written in the 3rd century, then that would tell me it was written again. So it got modified. And that would explain, that actually would explain a lot of blatant internal contradictions that are in Thomas. I mean, sometimes it'll be block by block. Like at one point, say fast, and another point says don't fast. I'm like, well, just get rid of the don't fast part, and the other part's fine. And so, especially when we're kind of being told that it was written again, it's like, okay, well, then it's justified to modify it then to try to restore it to its original form in the best way possible. Yeah. I don't normally like doing that, but since we're basically being told that the text was played with in the ancient world, I don't mind with Thomas. But typically, I prefer manuscript evidence or just hard evidence of like knowing that something was absolutely added later.
It's just hard when they destroy everything that doesn't conform to their story. Let me just jump in on one last point, and then hopefully we'll have some questions. But it's relative to what you said about Mark and Matthew, or Matthew and Luke. So I watched Robin Walsh did a thing about for the Bart Ehrman team, the biblical BSA. I forget what that stands for, but she's on his team. And she was talking about, she had a clip from Joe Rogan, and there was a guy, and I don't know what side of the argument he was on, but abortion or pro-life or pro-abortion. And he was quoting the line from Luke's gospel, where Luke says, has the archangel that tells Mary she's pregnant with God's son, and she says, may I am the handmaiden of the Lord, may it happen according to your words. And I happen to use, this was like one of these truth is stranger than fiction things. Robin really didn't like my depiction of this character, Lucia, because she was a modern woman, but stuck in 2nd century Rome. So she's the brains behind the mythicist argument, and she happens to be collaborating with this guy named Luke. And I created these characters to have that debate, right? Probably takes place over 30 pages, over like 3 chapters. Kind of like I said, I had to set the stage for their romance, right? And now they find themselves, crafting the Gospel of Luke. But Robin was like, she's way too modern. If she acted that way, they'd cut her head off. No woman in Rome would act that way, blah, blah, blah. So I definitely took some liberties there. But I had, and it just happened to be perfectly lined up with the difference between Mark's version of that part of the story and Luke's. So Matthew doesn't talk about that at all, right? Like Jesus doesn't even have a childhood in Matthew's gospel. But in Mark tells the story of Joseph was going to, not marry Mary when he found out she was pregnant, but he had a dream. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and told him, it's God's son. She's not fooling around on you, right? In Luke's gospel, then he adds those lines where the angel then leaves Joseph and goes to Mary and basically gets her consent, which is a strange concept for second century women. They didn't need anyone, a woman's consent to do whatever they wanted. And that's why it's kind of strange that 2,000 years later, this guy's quoting that passage from the Bible as if it's providing consent one way or another. And Robin goes back into the Greek, and the word is not handmaiden in Greek. It's one translation, but it could also be slave, right? So it brings up all these other issues when we try to impose modern, sensibilities on 2,000-year-old texts that we're trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong. We've come a long way. I don't think we should be quoting, from a 2,000-year-old Bible when we're making political and economic decisions these days. So that's kind of part of what I, feel like all of this is interesting, but there's a bigger picture where what are these stories intended? How are we supposed to make sense of what's going on today when we're reading these stories? Because I don't think they really carry the package anymore. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I'll just say that, yeah, it is a problem to read modern viewpoints into the past. That's obviously not a wise thing to do. It's not going to end well, because the people writing the Gospels are not thinking like we are today. Not even close. I mean, it's very obvious that they're not thinking like we are today. Solara Knight, thank you for your super chat. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. John 15:13, not for faith. What's your take on that?
I got you. Well, I kind of think of, what's his name? The William Wallace Braveheart movie that Mel Gibson did back in the 90s. I remember watching that thinking, man, this guy suffered that torture. And I mean, Mel Gibson took some liberties, obviously, but there's plenty of examples. One of my characters in my book says that. Man, there's plenty of examples of people sacrificing their lives for other people. You don't need to rely on Jesus having done it for people that their only sin is original sin, like they were born so they're guilty. Like, I never agreed with that. So I agree with Solara Knight.
Right. It kind of reminds me of vicarious redemption.
Yeah.
So Jesus dies for the mistakes and sins of everybody else, but that's not what's taught in the what I think is the older text. And like Bart Ehrman thinks that the Gospel of Luke was going back to the original Jesus tradition that Jesus actually taught, that it is not death, or his death, which didn't happen yet because he was still alive. That would be atonement for sin. And when you read the Hebrew Gospel, baptism is a baptism that cleanses away sins. And it is John the Baptist baptizing. That's a remission of sins. So it is the act of baptism that cleanses sins. And in the Hebrew Gospel, you also see dietary restrictions. And they are identical to what you see with the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you pretty much have anti-meat eating going on in the Hebrew Gospel, which this is why it's one of the reasons why I think James Edwards is right, that the Hebrew Gospel is actually first century. It's older. It's an older text, and so that's why to me it makes sense that the Hebrew Gospel is older. I don't buy that this is later. because it's saying very, very strange things I don't think make much sense in a later tradition.
Yeah, I have a character named Mark who sort of later on becomes the guy who writes the Gospel of Mark, and he has a conversation with a centurion at Masada. And they're basically trying to rectify the fact that the end of the world came. As far as they're concerned, that was the end when the temple was destroyed. Where's Jesus? Mark then, as a result of this conversation with the centurion, who's kind of mocking him, like, your God's so great. What the hell happened? Where was he? Why didn't he show up? And you guys are the chosen people, chosen to do what? Suffer? Well, everyone suffers. You're no better at that than anybody else I've seen. And then Mark has the light bulb go off. He's like, oh, it was never a military Messiah. It was salvation in the afterlife. So the city in the clouds, the kingdom of heaven is up at, in heaven, not here on earth. And, we don't know what happened, so we really can't say what didn't happen either, right? So that's where my fiction resides, in that area between plausible and probable. Anything is possible, but I tried to make it, and this is why I worked with Dr. Carey and Dr. Walsh, to make sure I was not doing anything that was so implausible. I would say the only thing is that character Lucia is a modern woman stuck in 2nd century Rome. That's about as implausible as I get. But I think everything else in my story is like, yeah, it could happen. We don't know what happened. This could have happened. And whether he was a real historical person or a mythical character that was later historicized, a lot of these things had to happen anyways. You know what I mean? A lot of these writings, a lot of the, certainly Constantine converting, that was 300 years later. So he didn't know Jesus as a real person or not. And I don't think it mattered to him. I think he saw it as an opportunity to, provide the carrot and the stick in one story, right? The carrot is everlasting life in heaven with Jesus after you die. And the stick is, he's watching, you better do the right thing, because I can't put a centurion on every corner in the entire Roman Empire. But Jesus is like the elf on the shelf. He's watching from above, and you better do the right thing or you're going to the other place, So to me, that's why Constantine could take this story and run with it and replace all the other, Osiris and all the other pagan gods, because this story served his purposes better. And, I hope you guys get a chance to discuss it. I'd love to see one of the biblical scholars come on and say, oh, DiGangi's way off base about this, but I kind of like how he handled that, and certainly your subscribers, I'd like to see if they have any comments. Anybody write anything from that had already read it?
Not seeing any indications of that in the chat so far. That was the only super chat that I received.
Yeah, gotcha.
From Solar Night so far. Because right now, one of the things that's going on is that now there's a huge debate, a much larger debate now about the dating of the text.
Right.
And this is something that I talked about years ago. There was the Erastus inscription, which was hailed as powerful proof that Paul wrote in the 50s. Everybody, it's settled. But then somebody else went there, redated it, and said, no, this has been dated wrongly. This is a Hadrianic era inscription. Oh, it's just, well, it's not the same Erastus. That's how we'll deal with it. I'm like, no, it's the same guy. It just doesn't fit your dating of it. Date Romans later, at least late 1st century, to recognize that Erastus is alive in the 8130s, interacting with Emperor Hadrian. But again, it's hard for, like, especially for those that have been defending the standard dating for so long. But to me, I don't think it. I think the issue is like, okay, well, somehow it's going to be the apocalypse for the historical Jesus. I'm like, no, I don't think so at all. Paul never met Jesus anyway. I don't think the debate should center around his letters, because I look at it differently. I don't think it should be determined from his letters if he existed or not. It should be the focus should be on the other texts.
Why do you think they did? Why do you think they started writing Gospels?
To make Jesus rival Greco-Roman deities, to make him better than Greco-Roman deities, Greco-Roman heroes. I like a lot with the work of Dennis MacDonald and Robin Walsh on showing Greco-Roman influence on the Gospels, and I think they're trying to make Jesus compete with these heroes, and Paul's letters weren't enough, and then the Gospels, I think, were before Paul's letters, like the original Thomas, and the Hebrew Gospel weren't enough either. And then when Mark wasn't enough, they do away with the messianic secret, because we don't want it to be a messianic secret. We want it to be teachings for everybody. Matthew's Great Commission. Right. This is going to go out to the whole world. Everybody's going to be taught it. Virtually, almost everybody. So that's the way I look at it. It's an attempt to make Jesus better than make Jesus calm the storms, like Odysseus calms the storms, as MacDonald points out. Just one brief example. So if you make Jesus do all these things, then it would make it, at least make it seem to be difficult that, my God's better than yours. Well, Jesus does the same thing.
Yeah.
So is he?
And then he voluntarily submitted to, torture and death to save our asses, right? Like,
right.
That's a compelling story.
While also having Jesus say to God, "Why did you forsake me?" So there's that.
Yeah.
So that does make one wonder. Okay, well, all of that for that, but then you say that at the end. So what's going on? Yeah, I also think the Gospels were also kind of collecting ideas of different sectors of Christianity that had conflicting beliefs. That can also explain internal contradictions to an extent. That kind of like with Paul's letters, because Paul's letters, I think, set the precedent there that, hey, doesn't matter, as long as we're all in Christ, we're in it together, regardless of who you are, where you're from, what differences there are there. As long as we're in Christ, that's all that matters. And that's. I'm summarizing because I'm avoiding a lot of the more complex details because we don't have time to get into all of that right now.
No, that's actually sounds like a pretty good way to end, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Yeah. Well, again, I appreciate your giving me access to your audience. I hope they buy the book. I hope they enjoy the book, and I'd love any feedback. My email address is on the back cover, and but I really appreciate your giving me this opportunity, and thanks to you and all your subscribers.
Yep, and again, Dying for the Faith will be in the description below, and the pinned comments. You want to go buy the book? It's right down there. The link's right down there to get it. And with that being said, Peter, thanks for joining me again.
My pleasure. Take care.
You too.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.